Welcome everybody to our webinar today. Unfortunately, we're having a little bit of technical difficulties with the video, so our speakers today won't be able to have access to video. It's unfortunate, but we got some really great stories and we'll still have some great slides and presentations for you all to watch. So thank you so much for joining us here today. And so today's webinar is Navigating Grief in the CRC Space. Now, this is something that we know is really important to our community and understanding different perspectives on how you can both understand and learn from your own experience as members of our community, but also the medical community and how we look at approaching survivorship, and not only for the patients as they're currently going through treatment, but then the families as well as treatment continues. So when we talk about loss and we talk about grief, we want to make sure we have an opportunity to create resources around those topics as well. So that's what we're going to get into today with our speakers. Before we get started and I introduce them, just if you have any questions, make sure you put them down in the Q&A section at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can also enter them into the chat, and we'll have a Q&A section at the end where you can get some of your questions answered. Also, this webinar will be recorded and will be posted on our website, fightcrc.org. So if you want to take a look at this again, check it out later, share it with other people, you'll have the opportunity to do so once we've posted it as a resource page. Then also feel free to tweet along and get connected with other members of our community through social media. Also, in addition to this webinar as a resource, we offer a wide variety of resources for those touched by colorectal cancer on our website as well. These include mini magazines, other webinars, podcasts. We have Your Guide in the Fight, which is a comprehensive resource for stage 3 and 4 survivors. So please go ahead and check out those resources as well when you get a chance. And now, just as a general disclaimer that we always do, the information and services provided by Fight Colorectal Cancer are for general informational purposes only. The information and services are not intended to be substitutes for professional medical advice, diagnoses, or treatment. If you are ill or suspect that you are ill, please see a doctor immediately. In an emergency, call 911 or go to the nearest emergency room. And Fight Colorectal Cancer never recommends or endorses any specific physicians, products, or treatments for any condition. So I'm going to introduce all three of our speakers first, and then we'll go ahead and get started with the presentations. Starting out is Dr. Jana Boldwan-Lomax. She's a licensed clinical psychologist. She received her bachelor's in psychology from Miami University, Ohio, and her master's and doctoral degrees in clinical psychology from the Illinois School of Professional Psychology, Chicago. She completed her pre-doctoral internship at Denver Health. Dr. Lomax specializes in health psychology. She focuses on working with adults facing chronic and/or life-limiting illness, their loved ones, and their healthcare providers. In 2017, Dr. Lomax launched Shift Healing Health Psychology, a private practice designed to provide high-quality, collaborative psychotherapy and healthcare consultation for adult individuals, couples, and families adjusting to medical conditions and bereavement. Next, after Dr. Lomax, we'll have Eric Houseman, came to Fight CRC in 2005 after his wife Rose was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer and then stage 4 18 months later. They loved the organization and its people and quickly became involved. They became grassroots action committee members and ultimately co-chaired the GAC, as we call it. Rose was a parole officer and Eric is a firefighter. She was a fighter with a huge heart and fought this disease for 12 long years until every available treatment option had been exhausted. Ultimately succumbing to the disease in September 2016, Eric continued their fight by sitting on the Fight CRC executive board. He fights this disease not only in her memory, but in the honor of all people who have passed and who continue to fight. So thank you so much to our speakers for being here and being able to share their story. We got one more, Angie Nicholas, of course. Angie Nicholas is a Fight Colorectal Cancer board member and advocate. She connected with Fight CRC through her husband, John McLeod, who is a stage 4 colorectal cancer fighter, as well as a Fight CRC board member and ambassador. She's the chief medical officer at Einstein Medical Center, Montgomery in East Norriton, Pennsylvania. All right, now thank you to all of our presenters. Really excited to have you here and to present your perspective and your story to share with all of us. Thank you first and foremost, before we even get into it, for feeling comfortable sharing in this environment. And we hope that we honor yourselves and your stories through the work that we do at Fight CRC. So starting out first, we have Dr. Baldwin Lomax's presentation. I'll be running the slides for her, and you can go ahead and get started. Thanks, Jana.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you all right.
Great. Thanks so much, Mike, and for Fight CRC for addressing this important topic. Go ahead and progress on to the next slide. So very briefly, because we don't have a lot of time, but we'll discuss grief and define it and the common experiences that people may have while going through grief. Then we'll talk a little bit about coping strategies and other means for managing your own grief, and then resources that I have come to trust and utilize in my work, in my practice, and then how to access resources for support. Can skip ahead. So defining grief, we often think about grief as the loss of someone or, loss of a life. But there are many other types of loss that we experience and we have grief reactions. So it may be the loss of something dear to us, the loss of control, which we have all come to know all too well in this last year. And then the loss of sense of health or the loss of trust in your body. And so I work with individuals in grieving all sorts of types of loss. And just recognizing that our grief emotions can be similar, whether it's someone we love that we've lost or something that we've lost. So recognizing that experience is across, all those feelings. Grief is a reflection of the connection that has been lost. It's how we feel after we've lost something, whereas mourning, and when we talk about a mourning time or mourning period, is an external expression of the grief reaction. Grief reactions are as individual and unique as each of us are. So they are often influenced by previous losses or previous deaths in our lives or in our families. And what I think is really interesting as I work with people who are coping with bereavement and grief is that they often reflect on previous losses that they've had, and they can be triggered, past grief can be triggered by present loss. And those responses are often also influenced by cultural and in some cases religious practices and beliefs, family approaches to grief, and societal practices and values around grief. I'm thinking of one client I'm working with right now who is struggling with the loss of a sibling, but she also lost a cousin when she was a teenager, and realizing that, she's now in her 40s, but that her family really shut down around the loss of her cousin as a teen 30 years prior. And she's now really starting to deal with that grief now anew, as she's also grieving her sister and reflecting back on the reactions that her parents had and her aunts and uncles had. And so these things don't happen in a vacuum. They don't happen in isolated circumstance. The way we understand and react to loss is very influenced by prior losses. Anticipatory grief is a grief that we experience as we start to think about losing someone or preparing for the end. I see that someone had a question about how do we prepare for someone dying. It's like being stuck in two worlds. Anticipatory grief is the world where you're with someone who's declining or anticipating something ending, but they're still here and trying to soak up those precious final moments while also preparing for a world where that loved one won't be any longer. And it's a very dichotomous place to be, feeling stuck between the two worlds, where you want to be very present in current life with the person that's still here, but also trying to tie up loose ends or have important conversations about things that we need to do before that person is gone or that something is gone. So there's this unconscious sort of tug and pull between where to be. common grief reactions that we have, as many people have heard at this point, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was sort of the mother or grandmother of how we understand grief and loss. And she described 5 phases or 5 steps of loss, which we now know to not be necessarily a chronological process, or even a process, or even steps that all people experience. So we do, however, when we are reacting to a loss, often experience some level of denial. We experience emotional pain and sometimes guilt for our own survival or things that we didn't do or say. We commonly experience anger, which is a very uncomfortable feeling for a lot of people. There can be bargaining, saying, you know, if this person, if we can have some sort of miraculous cure, I'll go, you know, before this person does. Then there's a depression, a very much sadness and hopelessness. And in some cases, some people get to a place of acceptance. I struggle personally with that word. It's more around learning how to live with loss, recognizing that things will always be changed. And there's not a moving beyond, but sort of a moving forward, living with loss. There are some new thoughts around the ultimate kind of goal of grief. The grief process is about making meaning of that loss. And that doesn't mean saying something along the lines of, you know, everything happens for a reason, which is a term that or a statement that I really struggle with. I don't think everything happens for a reason, but how do we make sense of something that really doesn't make sense in our lives? And that's where the making meaning can ultimately be a way of living with loss and making sense of it. And in the practice and in the grief work that I do with my clients, it's about finding space for grief in everyday life that still allows you to find joy and find fulfillment while also honoring the loss of something so important and bringing along that memory with you. You can move on, Mike. Thank you. So these are feelings, behaviors, reactions that are normal and expected as a reaction to grief. And I put that in the title of the slide because I want people to understand that these symptoms, if you will, which, you know, these experiences often look like someone would describe in terms of depression. But in the case of bereavement, even years after a loss, it's important that we separate pathology, problematic depression, from what is expected of normal loss. Well, a normal grief reaction. No loss necessarily feels normal in someone's life, but we often experience distractibility, sadness, anger, a feeling of numbness, like almost an inability to feel anything because we've felt so much, often leading up to the loss and past it, that a lot of clients come to me 6 months after experiencing a loss and saying, I just can't feel anymore. And they experience a lot of guilt around that lack of feeling. So that disconnectedness from oneself and from other people. A lot of people feel really isolated, even though they may be surrounded by love and support. There's a very lonely experience around grief because it's so individual. And unfortunately, in our culture, we offer a lot of platitudes to people during, you know, when they've lost someone, and try to reduce their suffering, when in fact suffering is often the way that we honor our loss. And so wanting to feel some level of pain and discomfort is in some ways comforting to people as they're grieving. That's their way of continuing to live with that loss. So people feel misunderstood by the people around them. Some people experience, as I said, guilt and then physical pain, fatigue just from the emotional exhaustion. And often it feels kind of like an emotional hangover after a lot of intensity leading up to the death. And even in times of preparing for funerals and memorials, there's a lot of busyness. And when that ends, it can feel like the bottom drops out. People have changes in appetite. As time goes on following the loss, I've had a lot of patients describe bursts of grief or waves of grief when they really thought that they were, moving toward, normalizing after that, then they'd just be blindsided by an unexpected reminders of grief or reminders of their loss. And why I think that happens is because although someone we love or something we love has died, our love for them has not died. And that's where we, continue to honor the loss. Okay, Mike, you can. So how do we cope? And I just feel like I just rushed through all that, but I know it's important to give you some ideas for how to cope. Find time and space and patience for yourself when coping with grief. The early stage of grief, as grief, experts define it, is 2 years following the loss. A lot of people think following the first year and all those first milestones, first holidays, that they should feel, I'm should with air quotes, should be moving on. When in fact, I've had many people tell me the second year is even harder because everyone else seems to have moved on and they're starting to create new memories with the life beyond their loved ones. So allow yourself space and time and patience. Journaling, writing, and creative expression can be ways of coping with loss, of creating time for that, and just being intentional about thinking about the loss. Talking with other people who've experienced similar losses. So if it's a spouse, if it's a parent, if it's a friend, those are all very different experiences of loss. And so finding someone who's had a relationship similar to yours and has had a similar loss. Do try to regain some routine and patience and purpose over time. A lot of people will take a sabbatical from life, which can just give almost too much time for thinking, when it's important to also be intentional about connecting with other people. Grief is not a problem to be fixed. It is a way of living with loss. So it is not, in our society is so intent on moving people beyond suffering. And so we're trying to fix it, when sometimes just being able to feel that sadness is the most comforting thing that someone can have while they're learning to live with loss. Again, finding ways to be intentional about mourning and remembering. Mother's Day just passed, and I have a lot of clients who have lost a mother or lost the ability to be a mother themselves. And so Mother's Day can be quite triggering. And so we talk about how to prepare for Mother's Day so that it can be an intentional time for mourning and an intentional time for remembering. Do not expect to grieve on a timeline. So although I just mentioned that 2 years is the early stage of grief, grief in many ways is with us for the remainder of our life. And it's about learning how to incorporate it and be intentional with it, and how to find joy while also holding space for sadness at the same time. Okay, you can move on to the next slide. These are some resources that my clients have loved and I have loved utilizing. This first one is Writing Through Grief. It's a grief writing group that is virtual, but you can do it on your own. One of my clients did it over 30 days. It's 30 prompts for writing through grief. You can do it also in a group. It has been very, very profoundly changing for people in my life. This documentary, Speaking Grief, is really good. It's a nice way of acknowledging how many of us are living with grief and we just don't know how to talk about it or share about it. And then this list of podcasts for grief is really interesting. Some use humor, some are a little brash, some are more thoughtful, some are religiously, focused. Others are more, not religiously focused. And then grief.com is sort of a great location, a kind of a clearinghouse, if you will, for a lot of information. And there is even a directory of grief counselors who've gone through training with their program. Okay, you can move on to the next. And then I have never found a list as comprehensive. I had one myself around grief books, but this one from New York Magazine was fantastic. And the ones here identified in this image are really good books, but there's subcategories for young people who've had loss, as well as different types of loss. So this is just a fantastic list that I share with my clients. And I think that takes us to the end. Oh, one more, accessing grief. So if you're noticing that your community is not sufficient for supporting you in grief, or if you need a little bit more, you could contact local hospice agencies. They often offer brief support groups. The caveat I'll mention about support groups is they can be wonderful, but it can kind of be a revolving door of people. So if you go from month to month, you may be re-experiencing the losses of other people or being in some ways traumatized. It can be a nice way of knowing that you're not alone, but I would like to just separate. Support groups are different from therapy groups. Support groups tend to be more open-ended, whereas therapy groups are closed and contained. You could talk with your primary care provider to see if they know of any licensed therapists that they work with, or your oncology program often have resource lists, and then of licensed therapists. And then the grief counselor directory is also a great resource on that website, grief.com.
All right. Thanks so much for that great presentation. A lot of important information, and sets a great foundation for hearing some stories from both Eric and Angie. Just wanted to stop for just a second because I saw some things in the chat about putting those resources in. I will work on putting those resources into the chat during the next presentations, but also we will be posting this webinar and all of the slides to our resource page where this recording will live on fightcrc.org. You'll get a link to that in a follow-up email that you'll receive as being an attendee for this webinar. So just let you know, we'll put those in there and you will have access to them afterwards as well. And thanks again, Jana. All right, so next we'll have Eric with his presentation. So let me just go ahead and hand it over to him.
Thanks, Mike, and thank you, Dr. Lomax. You know, I gave you a brief history about me, but I'll share a story first. And I sure don't want Dr. Lomax to be mad at me when she finds out that my story is quite unconventional. So, and she might be shaking her head, but it's probably good that she's not on video. So, my wife Rose was diagnosed at age 42 from stage 3 colon cancer. It took us by surprise. She was healthy, active, and she was a state parole officer. 18 months later, it metastasized to her ovaries and became stage 4. She had multiple surgeries, multiple chemotherapies, and multiple rounds of radiation, ultimately leaving her with a colostomy and a urostomy bag. She fought long and hard for 12 years, always pulling through and moving on to the next treatment or surgery. She tried 2 or 3 different clinical trials, ultimately succumbing to the disease in December of 2016. I was her caregiver, obviously, for 12 years. And I'm just going to talk about how I dealt with the grief. And again, it's probably somewhat unconventional, but this is how I dealt with it. The one thing that still lingers with me is being able to talk about it. I always tear up, and that's probably going to be with me forever, but that's okay. You know, I kind of felt that, like, no matter whether we like to admit it or not, that we all mentally prepare for it, for the death of a loved one. She had colon cancer, so it was obvious that ultimately, with stage 4, that she would succumb to it. So I think whether we like to admit it or not, we all prepare for it. Of course, we're never ready. I kind of felt about 4 or 5 different times after Rose had left the hospital that I didn't think she was going to make it. So of course I prepared for it 3 or 4 other different times. Of course, she defied science each time, and you know, her death was unexpected at the time. But I kind of knew it was only a matter of time. I hate to be crass, but it's just the truth. So, grieving for me kind of took place throughout the last couple of years of her life, I suppose. After she passed away, I grieved and I cried, but I managed to keep myself busy with work. For me, that was it for me, going to work. After, like the doctor said, after the funeral was over and everybody goes home, it gets a little quiet and a little lonely. So I didn't take much time off of work. They wanted me to, but I didn't. And spend time with friends, because that kind of helped me. That really helped me, being at work and being with friends. My family encouraged me to go to a grief counselor, and I did. And I realized it just wasn't for me. Maybe I needed to go longer, but for me, I just felt like it was easier to grieve at work, or easier to go to work and try to get my mind off of it. I still hold pictures of her throughout the house. And a few ways that I kind of help me deal with it. I find many signs of her approval throughout the day. And, I know she wanted me to live my life and never forget about her, and I don't. And that's kind of it.
Well, Eric, thank you for sharing a really powerful story and the message of hope that you have for people out there as well. It's I just want to once again thank you for feeling comfortable with sharing that in this space, and then I hope that people can see something of light in your story. Thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome.
And then we'd like to continue with our stories here of allowing the floor to Dr. Angela Nicholas to tell her story as well. Angela, please.
Thank you. And I assume you guys can see my slides here, correct?
Not yet.
Oh, wait. Oh, there we go.
There we go.
There we go. Okay. I want to start a little bit about talking about my husband, John. So as Mike stated, I'm Angie Nicholas. John and I met later in our lives. And John was a dad before he met me. He had two daughters, Emily. He raised Emily. He was a single dad for a long period of time, and then met his wife and had Sarah. And when I met Sarah, Sarah was almost 3 and Emily was about 16. And it became a pretty instant family. It was sort of that, oh my gosh, I've never met anybody like this before, that thing that you see on TV and people don't really believe that it happens. And for sure I didn't, but we very, very quickly integrated our lives together, and we got married in New Year's Eve in 2010. The pictures were just our life, the top upper left-hand corner was my 40th birthday. We got married again, our wedding picture, our family together. And then we were on vacation and we worked together. We worked at the same company. We had opportunities to travel a lot for work, and we traveled a lot for pleasure. And we were in traveling, and he had some symptoms. 2 weeks later, he saw a doctor who said, you need a colonoscopy. A day later, actually that day, he saw a GI doctor. 2 days later, he has colonoscopy. And I was at a job interview, and the doctor called me, and I am a physician, as Mike stated, and said, your husband has a 7-centimeter mass and it's cancer. And I said, you have the wrong person. I am John's wife. John is 45 years old and my husband does not have cancer. And he said, where are you right now? I said, I'm in the car. He said, I need you to pull over. And again, your husband has cancer. And it was pretty horrific. He was 45. There was no family history. And this picture down in the bottom right-hand corner was right after he was diagnosed. It was about almost 2 months later. It was our first Christmas with him having cancer. And we were scared to death. and that picture of me, I, a little bit of a smile, sort of like, oh my gosh, what is happening to us? And then we started our treatment plan, and it was chemo and surgeries, and he had stage 4 at diagnosis, a colon mass, 9 liver mets, too numerous to count lung mets, and we were on a mission to get him cancer free. And it was not going to stop, and he was not going to stop, and he pushed me really hard. And then as he started to do better and be stronger, I started pushing him hard. And so the next thing was he got involved, and that's him at a Undie Fun run. His friends gave him that Superman cape, and he ran the race with the Superman cape and with next to him with his daughter. And that was the John that we knew. He was, again, not going to give up and not going to give in. And about 9 months after that, I saw a little thing on Facebook about Fight CRC advocates or ambassadors, Fight CRC ambassadors. And I said, you need to apply. He said, I'm not doing that. And my answer was, you will do that. We are incredibly lucky. You are doing so well, and you need to prove to everybody that they can do the same. You need to share what you know, and you need to get out there, and you need to start doing this. And he couldn't have done that, though, I think, a little without the support of his friends. And the more he got involved, the more our friends that were with us all the time became involved. He really was a spark that lit a flame. And he did all kinds of things to make sure that people knew that they needed to get their colonoscopy. And that became a passion. He was very passionate. I do need to say he was very passionate about golf. Golf was absolutely his thing. And as he got more and more, involved in clinical trials and other things happening, he had to take time off from his job. He was a salesman by training. And he then turned that, that purpose into passion. There's, as you can see, this was John. Every day his friends were doing strong arm selfies, and he was on the golf course, and the picture on the bottom right hand corner, the guy in the blue shirt there was a guy, Tim, who he's very, very close to. They played golf twice a week at least, sometimes 3. The woman and Tim's sister was diagnosed with a very aggressive sarcoma. His wife had been diagnosed with breast cancer around the same time. That's Karen standing next to him in the red shirt. They're all wearing yellow for sarcoma. And the guy next to John was a guy that they played golf in memory after Eugenia had passed away. So it didn't matter what cancer, he was on your team, he was on your side. And his job was to make sure that you knew that you were not alone. I mean, he said over and over again, if you're a friend of John McLeod's and you have cancer, you will never be alone. And I can't tell you the number of people that, talked to me about what he did for them that I really didn't know. He was inspired, and this is about the people that inspired him. We didn't know Rose, but Rose and Eric inspired John, along with Pam, another one of our friends, every day. He talked about Rose like, honest to God, Rose was his sister. People thought we knew Rose, which I think is so fun and so funny. And I feel like I know Rose as well. Eric has become a very good friend. The Fight CRC community became my support and John's support. And one of the last conversations that John had when he was feeling really good was with Angie Davis, who is our president of Fight CRC. He loved Fight CRC so much he got a stinking decal and put it in the bottom of our pool, and that was his 50th birthday, about 3 or 4 months before he got really sick. I mean, he was all about making sure that people knew that Fight CRC was a place to go for everything colorectal cancer, and he wanted to be part of that. And then lastly, he had hope. We were extensive users of the clinical trial finder. He was this picture of him on the left hand or on the right hand side was the day after he had a pretty extensive lung surgery. And he wanted everybody to know how great he felt. And, there's he wearing his Fight CRC hat, going to clinical trials. Two of our friends were nurses, and they took him down to an appointment at the NIH for a clinical trial. He was all about hope and all about making sure that everybody knew that there was hope, and he was going to live with cancer. And that was his, if you excuse the phrase, the F you to cancer that he had every day to live his life. John got very sick, and he got very sick in November of 2018. We were in Arizona for a colorectal cancer awareness event with Harry Connick Jr., which I was so excited to be asked to be part of, and so was he. He got incredibly ill there in Arizona. We got him home, and he was very sick for the next couple of months, and he passed away in April of 2019 with his friends at his side. And I will tell you, there were 12 people in the room, and every person was somebody that had to be in the room with us. That's just the way he was, and the love that he had. And so then I began to grieve. I mean, I had a lot of anticipatory grief. The anticipatory grief started the year before he got sick. The summer, August, before he got sick at his 50th birthday, right before that, I had a long conversation with his younger daughter and told her that I didn't know that Daddy was going to be here next year. And that was really hard, but that was preparing myself mentally for what was going to happen, and preparing his then, I think Sarah was 12-year-old daughter, for what was going to happen. It was hard. And I will tell you that, we didn't know when it was going to happen, but like Eric said, we had a lot of anticipatory grief. He was very angry, very, very angry. And he knew he was dying, and we couldn't talk about it, which made it even harder. As we've mentioned, I am a physician, so I knew the signs, and I knew what to expect. And I knew about anticipatory grief, and I knew that he was dying. And when he was so sick, I slept in the ICU. I stayed by his side, as Eric did with Rose. We were not going to stop until every stone was turned over to find a cure for my husband. But ultimately, that obviously wasn't going to happen. And I needed to figure out then, what was going to happen to me. And literally, this is where I felt I was. I was on a precipice. I had a drop of 1,000 feet. There was nobody in front of me, and there was nobody behind me. And I was out there all by myself. And realistically, I wasn't. I had lots of support, but nobody knew my story. Nobody knew what I went through. I had horrible grief brain, and grief brain, for those who know about chemo brain, my John used to say it was like a filing cabinet. You open up the drawer, but there's nothing in it. And I had grief brain like that. I mean, I went back to work fairly quickly because I didn't know what else to do with myself. I literally, like Eric, I couldn't be at home. It was too hard. And so I worked really closely with my boss, and decided I was going back to work soon. So I went back to work in 10 days. I was unable to be alone. Every Friday and Saturday night, I had to be out of the house because the memories were too hard. And we were very social as a couple. And I needed to continue the rituals that we had. We had Wednesday night dinner with our friends every Wednesday. That had to stay. I was very OCD about continuing the rituals. I also felt a very strong need to celebrate and commemorate. I celebrated his birthday with a birthday party. I commemorated the anniversary of his death for a year with a picture and a social media post. I really needed to figure out, how do I celebrate his life in a way that wasn't morbid, but made a reality and made it real for me. And so I did that a lot. And I think that was hard for people, but I didn't really, frankly, care. It was what I needed to do and how I needed to celebrate John's life. Eric talked about signs, and I will tell you that I have signs. This was Christmas Day. I decided that I couldn't be home over the holiday, the first holiday without him. My birthday is in December, very close to Christmas. I celebrate Christmas. Our anniversary is New Year's Eve. I went to Costa Rica and asked him for a sign that I was doing the right thing, that I was living the life he wanted, that I was going to be okay. And I felt something starting to poke me, and I reached underneath, and there's a golf tee. So I see a lot of signs, and that really helped me to feel comfortable about what was happening with me, and honestly, to me in some ways. I had a lot of support. These are just a couple of pictures. My two stepdaughters, our friends, for John's 50th birthday, our friends gave him a golf outing to raise money for Fight CRC, and we did it again the following year. So that's some pictures at the golf outing with some of my best friends, with my stepdaughters, and then going to Nashville, we were at a Fight CRC event where my friends came and my family came to support me as I got the chance to talk about John. The friends that I have, I am incredibly lucky, because they never said, "Oh, get over it. Oh, you'll be fine. Oh, don't worry about it." They would call and say, "Hey, today must have been really tough. Today's the 22nd. Hey, can we come over? I want to bring dinner for you. We want to just spend a little time with you." And if I wasn't up to a visitor, they'd leave it on the front porch. But they were the kinds of friends. And this is just, a couple of pictures I had to do. I got together, but hundreds, I don't say hundreds, probably 15 people would do that on a rotating basis. I do want to say that I did have a bit of what I fondly call the widow's tour. And that is every week, a different friend of John's or I's would call and say, "Hey, let's have dinner together." And that started in June, and it lasted all the way through November. And I joked about it, but it was comforting, and it was touching. And they all got together. I mean, I finally asked somebody, and they said, "Yeah, this is what happened. We all decided that we were all going to make sure that you were okay." And every week they made sure that I went out somewhere and had a meal. And it was very kind and very generous and very loving of them to do that. But the issue was that John's greatest gift to me was to surround me with people that loved me. And I got to feel that like every single day. I will be remiss in saying that I could not find a picture of the third of my amigos here. There are three very, very special people to me who are also colorectal cancer widows. Jen Ganser and Christina Smith and Nikki Moore were there from the very beginning, right after John died. And we are on an ongoing group text that has never ended. And we are all at different places in our lives now, and they are still my greatest support and my greatest advocates. And they get it so much. And I'm the old lady of the group, but it's so sweet and so fun to be with them and to be able to laugh and to cry and to know what each other's thinking. I'm also on Colintown in the Beyond group, who has been an amazing support system. That bracelet comes from one of my friends who just said, "Hey, I need your address. I have something for you." And she sent me this bracelet that I wear almost every day. And lastly, I am on a physician widows group, and we support each other as our lives continue to evolve. Widows and widowers for me have been a really great support, because we all know what each other's doing and thinking, and we all understand what that's like for us and how we go through this, missing our partner, but yet living our life and wanting to have the support of others around us. And how do you, I mean, I remember my trip in Costa Rica on Christmas Eve having this existential crisis because people only knew Angie. They didn't know Angie, my husband, just died. And they knew my husband had died, but I wasn't the woman whose husband died. I was a person. I was Angie. And by the way, her husband died. And that was very new for me. And I was able to laugh and revel in a moment of a laugh that I hadn't laughed in probably 2 years. And those things are so, the duality of those feelings are so hard, but so amazing and so special. And these, all of these widows have taught me that there is no time limit on this, and there are different stages, and you go in and out of the stages. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was a great resource, but she acknowledged that you go in and out of all of these stages, and sometimes all of them in a day, and that's okay, and that's the life that we have. The Fight Colorectal Cancer community has also been an amazing support for me, and for those of you who are going through grief in any way, use the resources and use those friends. And I probably talk to somebody from the Fight CRC community every day. I am incredibly blessed to be on the board of this community and love the work that we do. And I live my life in honor and memory of John. And I get a chance to, talking about him today, this is part of my grief process. This is part of what I do, and being able to share his story. I got a chance to share his story on the doctors last week, and those things for me are very comforting and very helpful. There are no words some days to talk about the support that I've received from the Fight CRC community. So please use those references and opportunities. And lastly, now it's me, right? This is me that's left. And I've got to live my life and figure out what it means to be me. I will tell you that in the beginning, I didn't know what toothpaste I liked. I didn't know what rice I wanted to buy. I didn't know why I bought Dove soap. He wanted Dove soap. I didn't really care. Now I buy different soap. And that's a hard thing. And so now figuring out who I am has led me to an amazingly fun life. I miss John, but I'm 2 years out, and I'm still going through that grieving process. But I am doing things that I love. I cycle now. I was cross-country skiing and snowshoeing in the Tetons. I went to Crater Lake. This is his birthday last year. An amazing rainstorm happened while a group of us are on a bicycle at a place at Crater Lake I'd always wanted to be. And we got off the bike. I looked up and I'm like, John, I know you're here. I know it's your birthday, but stop it. I need to go on this bike ride. And within seconds, the sky opened up. It got green. It got blue again, and the rain stopped. And this was John saying to me he was here. Another sign. I continue to push myself. For me, exercise and taking care of myself has been a really important part of my grief process, and has helped me see my limits and helped me realize there are no limits. I have no limits. The only limits I have are the limits I give myself. And I get out on that bike, and I'm also a Peloton addict, and I can cry and I can push myself and I can make myself feel. And so that numbness that I had went away when I was exercising. And it made me forget about the fact that my husband just died. And so that for me has been a great outlet, and really opened myself back into doing things that I love and that I get a chance to do with friends now, and has been a really amazing adventure. So I'll tell you, I don't have the answers. I don't know what the right answers are. But for me, this is what made me, see the joy in life. And John, John will never leave me. He will always be here with me. But I use the community and resources that I have, and I'm living my life, and I'm proud of what I'm doing, and he would be very proud of me. And that for me is the most important thing. I will continue to live my life in a way that makes him very proud of me. And to be honest, I'm sure Rose is incredibly proud of Eric, and I think Rose is proud of me too. So, and John's very proud of Eric. John and Eric were friends as well. So I'll end here with the picture of how we will continue to live our life. This is John jumping off our balcony when we got a chance to go to Bora Bora. And this is in my bedroom, and I look at this picture every day, and this is what I will continue to do. So I'll stop here and turn it back over to questions and the rest of the program.
Thank you, Angie. Yes, for your stories of strength, for your stories of John and his strength and everything. You know, we do a lot of webinars, we do a lot of resources and everything, but it just goes to show that, you know, our strongest resource in our community is our community. And just being able to have that and something that we hope that everyone can join and gain from and be able to be a part of, because it's clearly the strength that's needed in these times. So thank you so much for sharing all of that and putting that out there. Thank you, Eric, for sharing your stories of yourself, and Rose. Thank you, Jana, for putting together, you know, a great foundation for us on grief and sharing your expertise and experience as well. I think that all together, this is a way that we can hopefully be able to create some positivity in this process and understanding for the rest of the people who are here joining us and for those who are viewing this recording in the future. So we did want to get a chance to do a Q&A before we wrap up. So please, if you have any questions, enter them in the Q&A box in the bottom. We have one that came in from Joe, which is, how do you prepare for someone you know is dying, especially if they are in hospice care? That sounds like that may have been a general question open to anyone. So if you'd like to, someone who feels that they can respond to that, please do so.
I think, I mean, I will tell you that John didn't have a chance to go to hospice. He was dying, and I knew that, but he wasn't ready. And the day he died I knew that morning that he was going to die that day. I don't know how you prepare. I personally couldn't. I don't know. I don't know. It's hard.
Sure.
I just want to chime in. I'm not sure, like you, Angie, that you can prepare and feel ready ever for that death. But I will say, if someone is in hospice, and I see this a lot in couples where one member of the couple is more ready to have a conversation about the end than the other, kind of as Angie described, you could see about having someone facilitate it, such as a chaplain or a social worker, to help create a safe space for talking about preparation for the end. But some people really, you know, it's their right. If it's the person that is in the final phases of life, it's their right to choose how they want to do that. And that's really, really hard for those of us that are trying to navigate questions we may have or things we want to say. So it is a very delicate process, but sometimes there are professionals who can help facilitate those conversations.
Thanks, Jana. Okay, well, if there's no other questions that come in, I want to just take an opportunity to thank everyone for being here today. And certainly, if you have questions that come up and think about it as you learned today, our community is a very supportive community, as well as Colon Town and Colon Club and many other places that we partner with that have their own communities that we're able to help get people connected. What works for you is what's going to be something that's going to be powerful and impactful for your journey. So thank you all for joining us today. And thank you to our speakers for their stories and for their expertise. And thank you as well to our sponsors, No Shave November and Genentech. Once again, thank you for being here. Thank you for this space to share and for the connections that we've all made today. Everybody take care.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.